So in this video, I'm going to break down 3 science-based and crucial keys to visualizing and becoming your desired future self. The first one is actually to choose and visualize your future self. My question for you is, how much time do you actually spend visualizing where you want to be? If you study the lives of any Olympic athlete or someone who did something great, there was a huge amount of visualization there. Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Michael Phelps, all sorts of people who actually did things. Again, you study the lives of Olympic athletes. At night, they visualize themselves on the podium receiving their gold medal. They see themselves not only receiving the outcome of what they want, but actually perfectly engaging in the process, engaging in that process. And that's a big aspect of it, is visualizing your future self. The first part of visualization is actually taking the time to choose what you want. I would recommend you have no more than 3 outcomes that you're trying to create at one time. I love the quote from Jim Collins. He said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. So visualize, just take for a second to think about what are 3 things that you want in your life more than anything else. It could be an amount of money in your bank account. It could be, being in an amazing relationship. It could be living in a certain place. It could be having a beautiful family. Whatever it is, think about where you really want to be. And a core aspect of wanting is that you want it for yourself, not for anyone else. You're not trying to justify it. You don't need to defend what you want to anyone else. You get to choose what you want. That's actually a part of becoming what psychologists call self-determined, or having autonomy, having intrinsic motivation, is that you want what you want for yourself. You may want it also for the benefit of other people and to serve other people, but you deeply want it for yourself, not to prove yourself to anyone else, not because anyone else wants it for you. You want it for you. So think about 3 things you really want, the 3 most important things you want. And it could be any time in your future. It could be 3 years into your future, 5 years into your future. I recommend sticking to 3 years as well. What would you like 3 years into the future from now, and what are the 3 most important outcomes? And after you've actually taken the time to define all that for yourself, actually see yourself there. See yourself finishing that marathon, or losing all that weight, or having that money in that bank account, or having crossed that finish line, or being in that environment or in that circumstance you want. You actually want to take time to visualize it, to see it. And you want to do that on a regular basis. The 2 most powerful times to do that are right before you go to bed and right after you wake up, because that's when your brain is in kind of a slower moving state. And you actually want to prepare yourself for your visualization by not scanning through your phone beforehand, but by actually slowing yourself down, maybe putting your phone on airplane mode, getting yourself into the right environment, writing down your big 3, taking some deep breaths and actually seeing it. But then one of the things you want to do, and this is going to be a theme throughout all of these big 3, is you want to feel it. So you want to actually feel what it would feel like to be there, to feel what it would feel like to achieve that goal, or to cross that milestone, or to be on top of that mountain, whatever it is. See yourself, feel it, feel what it would be like to have that. So take time regularly to visualize your future self. If you're not doing that, then chances are you're not going to become your future self. There's a great amount of research in neuroscience, broken down by a lot of people, that say that the visualization of an event is just as potent and powerful as the event itself. Actually, there's a great amount of research that shows that the anticipation of an event is also more powerful. So if you see something in your mind and if you feel it, it can create a biological response just as potent as a regular event. And so if you're regularly taking the time to see and feel your future self, and seeing yourself specifically where you want to be, you want to see specifics, a specific amount of money in that bank account, or a specific experience you're having. You want to see and feel it, and that actually changes your brain. So take time to actually choose your future self and to visualize it regularly. Now that takes me to number 2, which is reward your future self. You want to give yourself a reward at the end of those big 3, or at a milestone along the way. So if you want to, for example, have $1 million, maybe think about how you would reward your future self once you had 100,000. Once you hit some milestone, give yourself an exciting reward. That reward should be motivating. It should be exciting. It shouldn't be a status symbol to prove yourself to other people, but it could be anything you want. Again, you don't have to justify or defend your vision of your future self. You also don't have to justify or defend the rewards you give yourself along the way, but give yourself a reward. I remember recently my financial advisor actually told me to give myself a reward once I hit a certain milestone for an amount of money in my investment account. And so I thought about what would be something that would be really exciting to have, and something that maybe I wouldn't want to give myself because I don't feel I deserve it. There's actually a great quote that says, your unconscious will never allow you to have anything you don't believe you deserve. That's actually a crazy idea. You won't have something if you don't believe you deserve it, if you don't think you're worthy of it. And so as you're thinking about your future self, if you're thinking about the outcomes you want, you also want to give yourself rewards for getting yourself there. And as you reward yourself in powerful ways, your belief about what you deserve will expand. Now, this type of deserving isn't like a sense of entitlement. That's not what we're doing here. It's actually just the sense that you actually can have that thing and that you are worthy of love. You're worthy, and you can have things you want. And it doesn't make you bad to have those things. So think of rewards for milestones along the way towards your future self. Rewards that would be amazing to you. It could be something small like going and getting a massage, or it could be eventually going on a trip, or remodeling your house, or buying a new car. It could be whatever is exciting to you. It doesn't have to be material. It could be just that you give yourself the full day off, or the week off, or it could be whatever you want. You get to decide the reward. But rewards are very potent and powerful. Now, this isn't carrot and stick motivation. Again, this is intrinsic motivation. What would be exciting for you to have? What would be exciting for you to watch yourself create? So give yourself rewards. Reward your future self. So step 1 is choose and visualize your future self. Step 2 is reward your future self. If you give yourself an exciting reward at certain milestones along the way, that's going to increase your motivation to find more and more resources to achieve your goal. So if your goal is a monetary goal and it's above and beyond what you've ever done before, but there's a really exciting reward and you're really excited about becoming that future self, you're going to find new ways to make money. You're going to find new ways to increase your income level. You're going to find new ways to stop your spending. You will find new and better ways, because necessity is the mother of invention, and you're going to find new ways to create your goal and allocate and find new resources to getting there that you don't currently have. There's a great quote actually that kind of reverses the economic principle that supply creates demand. It's actually the idea that demand creates supply. So if you demand that you have your future self, if you find that demand, if you find that desire, if you find that why, you will find the needed supply or supplies. The supply could be motivational, but it also could be other supplies. It could be other people. It could be support. It could be technology you don't know about. When there's a huge demand towards something, the needed supply will come. And so that's what you want to do, is you want to not only visualize and want your future self and have an exciting reward, but get to the point where you demand it of yourself. And not in a nasty or negative way, but just there's a demand for it. You really want it, and you're going to go out and get it, and then you'll find the needed supply. So the third one is to celebrate any form of evidence towards your future self that you see. Dr. B.J. Fogg, the Stanford psychologist, he also wrote a pivotal book called Tiny Habits. Talks a lot about the importance of celebration. So just like when you visualize your future self, you want to feel the emotion of it, that changes your brain. Well, celebration does the same thing, but it's in retrospect. So anytime you watch yourself do something towards your future self, it could be that you say no to that dessert that you would have normally eaten, or you go to bed on time without staring at your phone. Anytime you do some behavior that's relevant and also evidence that you're moving towards your future self, celebrate that. Celebrate it with energy, celebrate it with emotion, celebrate it in a way that's resonant towards you. You might go, yes, or whatever is resonant to you, whatever, but you want there to be some emotion, because emotion really pulls it down into the subconscious level, and emotion is ultimately what drives behavior. And so you want to celebrate and trigger the emotions of your future self. And so you want to celebrate any small win you get, and you want to measure that and reflect on it and make it powerful. Anytime you see evidence of your future self, celebrate it. And my invitation would be for you to not only visualize your future self and come up with exciting rewards towards your future self, but take bold action, spend time taking action and trying things towards your future self on a daily basis, and then celebrating those things. And as you do these 3 things, you will increasingly become your desired future self. You'll watch yourself taking action. You'll look back and see the evidence of that. Confidence is actually the byproduct of prior performance. And so confidence comes by looking back and seeing yourself and seeing evidence that you're moving forward. And then you celebrate that. Even the smallest wins, celebrate it. And that'll compound you. That'll push you forward. That'll get it more exciting. So give yourself compelling rewards. Visualize it regularly. See it, feel it. And eventually it just becomes your new narrative. Your identity is how you see and define and describe yourself. We're all consistent in our identity, our behavior. As people, we have a need for consistency, not only in how we define ourselves, our identity, but also in what we say and in what we do. And so over time, what I invite you to do is not only visualize your future self, but start tell people about your future self. Because if you're actually going to become that person, you can't hide it forever. And so you might as well start telling people that that's who you want to be, and that starts to be the driver of your identity. You want your identity to drive your behavior towards your future self. You don't want your identity to be so rooted in your past, which is where most people's identity is. Most people's identity is very past or present focused, but if you have your identity be your future self, and you start telling people about your future self, and you start taking action towards your future self and celebrating it, and if you have exciting rewards towards your future self and you're regularly visualizing it, then it just becomes who you are. And you can start orienting your daily life and your behavior and your results towards your future self. And you're no longer ashamed of your future self. You're no longer afraid of your future self. And you start to realize you are worthy of your future self, and you can have whatever you want, and it's your choice. So those are the big three. Those are three crucial science-based aspects towards becoming your future self, and they all hit you on the emotional level. Visualizing your future self, feeling what it would be like to get there, giving yourself potent, exciting rewards along the way, and celebrating any small victory, any small evidence, any small behavior towards your future self. All of these hit you at the emotional level, which is the subconscious level, and also they hit you at the identity level, which then gets to the point where you just begin to identify fully with your future self. You can become your future self. You got to choose it. You got to define it. You got to see it. You got to act towards it. You got to reward it. Be your future self. Give yourself rewards. Give yourself peak experiences. I actually have a really exciting reward I'm going to give myself once I hit a certain future self milestone. And watching myself get that reward is going to be super confidence building, super exciting. I'm super excited to get there. But it's intrinsically motivating. I have no desire to get there to prove myself to anyone else. And so in this video, I'm going to break down the 4 fundamental steps of not only connecting with your future self, but also then in systematically creating and becoming your ideal future self, and consistently doing that so that you can consistently create a bigger future, a more effective present, and you can continually upgrade your life. Now, if you like these kind of videos, please thumbs up this video. That would really help this channel. If you want more videos on future self, please subscribe to this channel where I break down all sorts of science and research to help you effectively and strategically become your desired future self and become successful. Now, before I jump into the 4 steps, I'm going to talk about some of the threats or the challenges that most people have with their future self. One of those threats or challenges is actually the idea that you've got to find or discover a big picture purpose. So Viktor Frankl in the book Man's Search for Meaning kind of shatters this myth. Yes, you do need a sense of purpose. And in fact, what the research shows is that whatever view you hold of your future is the thing driving your present. So in psychology, they call that prospection, that we're actually being driven by our future. We're not being driven by the past. As humans, we're actually driven by our future. A challenge for a lot of people, though, is that they don't have a clear sense of purpose. What Viktor Frankl found, and Viktor Frankl was one of the concentration camp survivors in World War II. He was in the Holocaust. And one of the things that he found is that once a person lost a sense of hope and purpose for their future, talking about the prisoners and the victims, the present became unbearable. The present became toxic, and those people actually died very quickly. In fact, what Frankl said is that the moment a person loses faith in their future, they're doomed. They start to basically atrophy and decay mentally and physically when you don't have a sense of purpose, when you don't have a sense of hope, and when you don't have a sense of courage towards your future. Frankl himself had a purpose which allowed him to survive the camps. He admitted this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He said that when he first got to Auschwitz, which was one of the camps, he had already had a book written. It was not Man's Search for Meaning, but it was one of his books that he had fully written, and that book was confiscated from him. And so he actually felt like it was a sense of purpose and mission that he had to survive the camps so that he could get out and rewrite that book and publish it. He felt it was very important. And so one of the things that is important to realize is that you don't necessarily need a big picture purpose in life. That's actually a false idea that leads people to paralysis by analysis. Rather than asking, what's my purpose in life, it's more about what's your purpose here and now? Right now. It could be for the next year or 6 months or the next 5 years. For Frankl, his purpose was to get out of the camp so that he could write that book. And so your purpose is contextual. Your purpose is situational. But you do need a sense of purpose in order to actually handle the present. That's actually one of the things that Frankl talked about. And so that's actually step number 1. Step number 1 is defining a purpose. One of the things that Frankl said is rather than asking, what can I get out of life, or what do I want out of life, he would invite you to ask, what does life want from you right now? What is very important, what's crucial for you to focus on right now that you feel like it's kind of a sense of calling, mission, or purpose, or a high priority? What's absolutely most fundamental? What's most important for you to focus on right now? Because Frankl felt it was very important for him to get out of the camps and write that book, he was able to handle the challenges of the present. As he quotes throughout his book, when you have a why to live for, you can bear almost any how. When you don't have that sense of hope, mission, or purpose, then the present becomes toxic and you can't bear anyhow. The little things in life become mountains and you lose sense of meaning. And so you need a purpose, you need a sense of mission and purpose in order to actually have meaning in the present and to handle the present. But also what the research in psychology shows is that hope is really about the will and the way. So you need a deep why and you need a specific goal, but you also need to find a way. And once you get really committed, you will find the way. That's why, like, you will find a way to get where you want to go if you're committed. So first step is just defining a core purpose. And I love the quote from Jim Collins where he says, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. I would invite you to break up your purpose into 3 categories. No more than 3. If you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. I'll be very explicit and very specific with my core purpose right now. And again, this is not my purpose for my whole life, although I could see that there's some congruence there. This is more my purpose right now, maybe for the next 5 years. The number one part of my purpose is my family. Connected with my family is my faith, but more specifically drilling down my older 3 kids. We adopted 3 kids from the foster system, and basically now they're 14, 12, and 10. And so my wife and I got together and we were basically talking, what's the most important thing we could be focusing on right now? It's absolutely and obviously those 3 kids, and just investing in them big time. And one thing that's really great is once you clarify your big 3, your core priorities, you then know where to draw your attention. That's kind of your what. What are you going to focus on? Where are you going to place your attention? And that's where you want to invest big, is in the 3 areas that matter most to your current purpose, to your future self. And your future self could be for the next, again, 3 to 5 years. So for me, number 1 core area of priority is especially my older 3 kids, but broadly more my family and my faith. Number 2 for me is books. Writing books is super important to me, and going 10x as an author over the next 5 years is a core aspect of my purpose. That's a big part of what I feel like life is asking me to do and encouraging me to do. It's also what I believe my future self really wants me to do. And so that's an area where I'm going to invest big time, is writing more and better books, and hopefully 10xing as an author, 10xing in terms of books sold, selling millions of copies of books. The third area of my purpose, and the only reason I'm sharing these is just to be honest and blunt with you, you'll have to clarify your core 3 priorities, and they probably will be very different from mine. But the idea is that you are clear on your priorities, because if you're not clear on your priorities, then you have no focus. And if you have got no priorities or focus, then you've got no identity. And if that's the case, then your behavior is probably being driven by other people's agendas, and you can't really make clean decisions. That again connects back to the idea that your view of your future self and your connection to your future self is determining the quality of your present decisions and actions. So my third area is money, and 10xing my own money, my financial situation, my net worth, essentially, and setting up my family, my wife, myself, my kids, for long-term compounding effects. Those are the 3 areas that I'm going to be investing big in. And what's great about future self is that whatever you invest in grows, and whatever you're consistently investing in begins to compound over time. And you can examine that in yourself, where at whatever area you've made investments in your life, and that could be in education, it could be in relationships. If you've gone to school, if you've gone to college, it's not, when I'm saying investments, I'm not just talking about like literally making financial investments. Reading a book is an investment. Watching this video is an investment. Whatever you're like literally putting your energy and effort into is an investment of time, energy, effort. Learning a skill or learning a language is an investment. So wherever you invest, and especially wherever you consistently invest, begins to create compounding effects. And so the nice part about clarifying what is your purpose and then defining that by 3 core priorities is that now you know where you want to invest. And wherever you invest starts to compound massively, and it actually compounds bigger than your current self can imagine. But those are the 3 areas that I'm looking to invest, so that in 5 years from now, my future self is exponentially different and beyond and better than my current self. Now there's 2 things that the research in psychology shows that bring this point even bigger. And one is that your future self is a different person than you, and your future self is more different than you expect. And so I expect that the 3 areas where I'm going to be placing a lot of energy, attention, and effort and focus and investment are going to be way different and bigger, and there's going to be a lot of unexpecteds that my future self will be and be handling that my current self simply can't imagine. One other cool point about this is that when you get really clear on your trajectory, it allows you to be a lot more patient with your current position. Your trajectory and your what they call slope in statistics, like the angle of your slope and your trajectory is a lot more important than your current position. Your current position, it matters, but it's not the be all end all. Your current self is very temporary. As Dr. Daniel Gilbert, the Harvard psychologist, said, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. Your current position is way less important than your trajectory. Your future self's going to be in a totally different place. Just like you're in a different place than you were in the past, the worst thing you could do is overly define and even overly defend your current self. That's actually what Carol Dweck would call a fixed mindset, where you're like overly obsessing on your current self and actually incorrectly assuming that your future self is going to basically be your current self. Your current self's going to change, and your position's going to change. So the worst thing you could do is overly define and defend your current self, but also another tragic thing would be to judge someone else based on their current self and their current position. It's very possible that the person you're judging could be in an enormously different place than you are than they are in a few years. I actually made that mistake once. A few years ago, I was the top writer on Medium.com, and I remember seeing younger writers come onto the platform and not necessarily thinking much of them. And now you fast forward like 4 or 5 years, and some of them are way past me in terms of writing career. Now, the great part is none of us are actually competing with each other because we're all on our own trajectories. And I think as Peter Thiel would say, competition is for losers. But the main point is that if I was judging some of those younger writers based on their current position back then, I would have potentially radically underestimated where they could go and where they could be. And they were on different trajectories. And so don't judge yourself or other people based on your current position, but invest where you want to focus. One other important point as it relates to your big three, your core priorities. I think it's really important to put them in buckets, specify them. For me, it's family, faith, books, money. Those are the 3 areas I want to invest in big so that they compound 10x in the next 5 years. And those are the core aspects that define my purpose, what I believe life demands or asks of me, or that I want or my future self wants of me over these next 5 years. Very possible that in 5 years from now, or even sooner than that, my purpose changes, my priorities change. I'm very open to that, but for now, that's my core purpose. And that's why I like the idea that your purpose is contextual. It's not just, what's my purpose in life? It's no, what's your purpose right now? And you break it into three core priorities. And one other way of just looking at these 3 core priorities is looking at your life like a garden. When you think about investing in something, it's kind of like planting seeds. You plant seeds so that they can grow and eventually bear fruit. And you don't plant banana seeds in the hopes of eventually harvesting pumpkins. And so why it's really important to clarify your core 3 priorities and the areas you're going to invest big in is that you want to invest the type of seeds and action and behaviors that will lead to the certain types of fruits you want. You want to ask yourself, what am I optimizing for? I like the quote from Zig Ziglar. He basically said, it's better to be a meaningful specific than a wandering generality. So where are the specific areas you want to invest big in, plant seeds in, and see grow massively? So that's number 1, and it also is number 2. 1 is defining a sense of purpose. Number 2 is clarifying 3 core priorities, which are the 3 core areas where you're going to focus in and invest in over the next X amount of years. Number 3 is taking your 3 core priorities and boiling them down into specific measurable targets, actual goals or measurable systematic aspects. So as an example, with my family, one of the measurable things that I want to be accomplishing in 2022 is taking 150 what Dan Sullivan would call free days. Free days where I'm not working, I'm totally just present with my family, unplugged from work, unplugged from the matrix of the outside world, and just totally in tune with my family. 150 free days or 150 off days may sound like a lot, but really what it is in my case, Saturday, Sundays, no work, and also then Wednesdays. Nothing scheduled, not doing anything, just mostly focusing on my family, having peak experiences, maybe learning new skills, could be a language or hobbies or whatnot, but 150 free days for recovery, for transformation, for connection. So that's one of my major measurable goals and ways in which I will live out my number 1 priority. As it relates to books, I'm publishing 2 books in 2022. Be Your Future Self Now is basically the 2.0 version of this book, which I published in 2020. And then the next book I'm publishing in 2022 is called 10x is Easier Than 2x, which is my 3rd book with Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan is the co-founder of Strategic Coach. He and I wrote Who Not How and Gap and Gain together. So our 3rd book is 10x is Easier Than 2x. And so I'm publishing those 2 books in 2022. I'm also committed to passing 1 million book sales collectively between all of my books in 2022. And then when it comes to finances, growing this YouTube channel, I've got a big coaching program, and then really getting good at investing, whether that be stock market, crypto, real estate. I've got my own pathways and strategies within these, but again, my core 3, family, faith, books, money. I really challenge you while you're listening to this to ask yourself, what is the purpose that I want to accomplish right now? Or what is life demanding of me and asking me right now? What do you really feel called to or impressed upon that you want to accomplish or focus on? Back to Frankl, you need that sense of purpose, meaning, hope, and courage to not only be able to handle the present, but to be able to focus in the present, and also then to find better and more effective strategies in the present. Your present, in large part, the quality of it is based on the specificity and the connection you have to your future self and the sense of purpose and meaning you have in that future. I'm now inviting you to really clarify what are the 3 core areas, core priorities of your life that really embody that sense of purpose, the 3 most important things for you that you want to be focusing on and investing in, and anything outside of those is probably what Robert Brault would call a lesser goal. As Robert Brault said, we're kept from our goals, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. And so there's a lot of distractions, a lot of things coming at you, and it's your job to weed the garden. Like your life's a garden. What are you optimizing for? You want to be planting and investing and, laying the fruit that you want, but you also want to be clearing the clutter, being what Greg McKeown would call an essentialist, like removing the things that are outside these core 3. And just optimizing for and getting really, really good at and being a meaningful specific. And then from those 3, setting specific tangible goals. In this case, I'm filming this video in end of November of 2021, and so I'm just laying out specific measurable targets for 2022 that reflect me living out these big 3 and make progress. So after you've set specific, meaningful, measurable, powerful goals, that's number 3. That takes you now to number 4. And that's about putting your calendar in place and scheduling the important before the urgent. Most people, they put their urgent goals before what's important. Now, this brings up a few things. Stephen Covey, in the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he was kind of known for having this example. He had a bucket, and what he would do is he would fill the bucket with little rocks and pebbles, and then he would have these big rocks, and he would try to put them in, and the big rocks would not fit because like more than half of the bucket was filled with the pebbles. And so basically what he showed is the only way to fit them all in is to put the big rocks in first, and then you pour in the pebbles, and the pebbles kind of fill the space. And most people, if they were to actually look at their actual schedule, their schedule is the little rocks. And the little rocks are like the urgent things, the meetings, paying the bills, taking the kids to school, stuff like that. The important stuff is stuff that is never urgent. It's, going to the gym. It's working on that book, working on that side hustle. It's doing those things that really matter big picture. So what you want to do, if you're serious about living out your big 3 and being your future self now and actually hitting your goals, is pulling out your schedule and putting your future self first, putting the big rocks in your schedule first and seeing those as an appointment with you and with your future self, and saying no to a lot of the lesser goals, a lot of the little rocks. And so for me, as an example, and I'm just going to use myself as an example in this case, but I want you to put your future self first. And also, it's really important to realize the first freedom you can ever achieve, and we actually talk about this in Who Not How, is freedom of time. If you can't claim your freedom of time, and if you don't start upgrading your sense of time, then it's really hard to get more freedom of money or freedom of, relationship and purpose. You got to start with owning your freedom of time. So as I said before, I'm taking 3 free days a week. So that's Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Those in my calendar are just like blocked off. Like nothing can go there. Those are like appointments with me and my family and my faith, but mostly in this case, me and my family. Now, one of the things that I realized about myself for a long time is even though I write books, it was never actually on my schedule. I would always just kind of have to squeeze that in, even though I'm an entrepreneur and I work for myself. And one of the things that Dan says is that entrepreneurs create their own game, but they often give themselves rules that lead them to losing. What I've recently done is I've changed my schedule, where on Mondays and Tuesdays, I have absolutely 0 appointments. So from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. on both Mondays and Tuesdays, that's scheduled time for writing books. 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday and Tuesday. And then from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., that's time for filming YouTube videos, because writing books and filming YouTube videos are the important content creation that I do that fuels everything else I do, fuels my learning, fuels my coaching, fuels my income, fuels everything. And so those are the 2, I got to put those things first, and nothing can be scheduled on Monday or Tuesday, because that's my appointment with myself, my future self, and putting first things first. That's me working on my big rocks. any appointments or coaching calls or things like that can be scheduled on Thursday and Friday, and they're hyper filtered. My assistant Chelsea makes sure to filter everything that goes on the schedule, but the only things that can go on my schedule, they can only be on Thursdays and Fridays. That's when, like, coaching calls, team meetings, and things like that. And so this schedule more fully reflects my big three, more fully reflects my future self, and it's putting the big rocks first. And so the only reason I, again, share that with you is to get you to think about your own self, your own schedule, your own time. How can you put the big rocks in first? It could be a date with your spouse. It could be going to the gym and having a, personal training session. It could be 3 hours of focused time a week thinking about your business, or actually, like, if you're learning a language, studying a language. Whatever your future self is, whatever the core areas of focus is for you, you got to place those in your calendar and put those first. And then let the little rocks take care of themselves. So these are the 4 levels. One is getting connected to a contextual purpose, a purpose for right now. It could be for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. I would argue it probably shouldn't be beyond 5. But what is the situation calling upon you right now? What is life asking of you right now? What matters to you right now more than anything else? And then breaking that down into 3 core priorities. What are the 3 priorities or the areas or the buckets of your life which matter most, which are the areas you're going to invest in big? Again, for me right now, it's family, and included in that is my faith. Family, faith, books, money. Those are the areas where I'm going to make massive investments. Those are the three areas where I want to 10x and really transform and experience the compound effect, so that in 3 to 5 years from now, I'm in an unbelievably different place in those 3 specific areas. Now, obviously, my life will be different in other areas than those, but those are the 3 areas where I want to place massive focus, energy, attention, and investment. Whatever you invest in compounds and transforms. So what are the 3 areas for you? What are your 3 core priorities? Back to Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. If you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. Gino Wickman wrote a book called Traction, which is all about, designing and organizing optimal businesses for entrepreneurs. And what he found over and over and over again, coaching business leaders and honestly, like, entrepreneurs, is that the entrepreneurs and the businesses that didn't go anywhere were the ones that had too many goals. And eventually, once they lowered their focus to just 3 core objectives, then they started to get major traction. So have no more than 3 core priorities. Then within that, set specific quantifiable goals in each of those areas so that you can actually make tangible progress. And then the 4th one from there is redesign your schedule. Let your schedule be booked that actually reflects the big rocks, what's important, not what's urgent. Most people, and there's a great quote from 50 Cent and Robert Greene in their book, The 50th Law, most people are just being driven by a short-term future, urgent battles, paying the bills, getting to work, getting to the weekend. They're not lifting their gaze and seeing a bigger future, starting to invest in a bigger future. I love the quote again from Dan Sullivan, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. So as you begin thinking about your purpose, clarifying your priorities, setting goals, and then designing your schedule and your time so that you're actually investing and putting the time on what matters most, your confidence is going to build, your perspectives are going to build, you're going to transform, your life's going to transform. It's not rocket science, but at the end of the day, and again, the research is pretty big on this, most people aren't that connected to their future self. Most people aren't investing big in their future self. And as a result, people set themselves up for disaster or bad situations in terms of their finances, their health, their relationships, and other areas. You want to take 20 steps in one direction, not one step in 20 directions. And most people, their goals and their desires are all over the place. They want too many things. They haven't reined in their desires. They haven't clarified their goals. So ultimately what you want to do is you want to clarify who your future self is. That's the first starting point of all goal achievement and all forward progress, is clarify who your future self is. Who's your future identity? Who's the person you want to be? What are the attributes? What's the situation you want to have? But once you've clarified a big picture future self, because your view of your future is the thing that drives your present. That's what psychologists call prospection. Your view of your future is the thing shaping what you're doing right here and now. And so ultimately you want to get clear on your future self, but then from there you want to ultimately define out 1 to 3 major goals. You shouldn't have more than 3 major goals. As Jim Collins said, if you've got more than 3 priorities, you have none. In today's world, we've overly expanded how many priorities you could have as a person. If you've got like 10, 15, 20 priorities, you've got none. Instead, you want to have like 3 or less. You want to be an essentialist. You want to have someone who's focused on less but better. And out of your 3 goals, you want to ultimately rank order them. Which one is the most important? If you can't rank order your goals, and if you can't define which one's the most important, then you're going to have a hard time knowing where you should put your focus. A keystone goal is the one goal that if you accomplished it would make everything else you're trying to do either easier or irrelevant. So ultimately what you want to do, once you've clarified your future self, is you want to define a clear, measurable outcome. What's the one outcome that if you accomplished it, you would become your future self? It could be a certain amount of money. It could be getting, for example, a book deal. When I was a graduate student, my future self, the person I imagined myself being, was a professional author. And so the one outcome that I imagined, or I ultimately clarified, was once I get a 6-figure book deal, then I will be my future self. That'll make everything I'm trying to do possible. And you really need to clarify a single outcome, because with a single outcome, then you can create a path. And in order to have a path from A to B, you're at A and your goal's at B, you need a specific, clear outcome. So what is the one outcome? This is your first step, is ultimately define your future self. Who's the person you want to be? What are the circumstances, the attributes you want to have? And then from there, boil it down to one key outcome. What's the key outcome you want to have? Once you've defined that key outcome in specifics, and it takes time to find that outcome. For example, me, when I was a young graduate student, ultimately wanting to become an author, I didn't just land on the idea that I wanted a 6-figure book deal. It took time. I had to have conversations with book agents, with professional authors, and then ultimately, after having multiple conversations, I came to the realization, okay, I want to get a 6-figure book deal with one of the major 5 publishers in New York. It took time to get to that point. I had to ask a lot of questions, do a lot of research, but once I nailed that one key outcome, then once you have an outcome, you can reverse engineer a process or a path. The process always comes from the outcome. A lot of people say you should focus on the process and ignore the outcome. That's really bad advice, because the process that you pursue ultimately is based on the outcome you want. So once you've defined the outcome, then you can start to reverse engineer the process. You can start to get advice, mentorship, guidance, and then you can go through the path of essentially failing forward. In my case, as someone trying to get a 6-figure book deal, one of the things I learned after having multiple conversations is you have to have a big email list. You've got to grow an email list. Well, then I had to ask, how do you get an email list? Well, you got to start blogging, and you got to learn how to capture emails. And so once you start actually clarifying the outcome, then you can start to build a path to getting there. And there's a lot of research on hope and motivation that shows that in order for you to actually have hope and motivation, you need a clear outcome that you want, you need a path or a process to getting there, and then you need to build the confidence that you can do it. And so that's basically what you need to do, is once you've defined the one thing, the one outcome that if it were true, everything else you want would be possible. That allows you then to simplify your life, because chances are you probably have too many things you're trying to accomplish, and that makes you overwhelmed, it makes you stressed, it makes you unfocused. You should have less goals so that you can have more flow, because flow is, in order to be in flow, you have to focus on one thing at a time. And if your brain is going in too many different directions, then you're probably doing everything at a mediocre level. You're too spread focused. Rather than advancing far in one area, you're advancing not far in multiple areas. And you're less effective, you're more split focused than you should be. If you want more flow, have less goals. If you want more flow, make meaningful progress on a daily basis towards the goals that you've identified as, this outcome will absolutely help me become my future self. This will set me up in ways that I then will have amazing capabilities and situations and opportunities from that next level. And so once you've clarified that goal, then you can reverse engineer the process, and then you can begin moving and advancing towards that outcome. And then once you get there, then you're standing on a new platform where you can imagine new goals. You then have capabilities that your current self doesn't have, and then you can set new goals from there. So ultimately, that's the key. Visualize your future self, then set one outcome, and then reverse engineer the process, and then go through the practice of deliberate practice to getting there. That's basically the key. And so my question for you is, what is that one major goal? What is the one outcome that if you accomplished it would allow you to become your future self? Do you even know what that goal is? Are you confident that that's the one goal you should have? And are you willing to let go of some of your lesser goals? There's a powerful quote that will stop you in your tracks. And the quote is this, from Robert Brault. Robert Brault said, "We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals." So basically, it's not the obstacles between you and your goal that's stopping you. It's actually that you've got clear paths to lesser goals. You have too many goals. We all have too many goals. And the only way for you to really get where you want to go is for you to stop doing your lesser goals. uncommit to certain things you're doing, uncommit to certain relationships, uncommit to certain distractions. You've got to remove all of your lesser goals in order to start working yourself through the obstacles or going through the deliberate practice process of becoming your future self. So you've got to define your one goal, but it's not the obstacles. Again, as Robert Brault said, we are kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by clear paths to a lesser goal. So my question is, first off, what's your major goal? What's the one thing that if you accomplished it would help you have everything else? And then the second question becomes, what are all the lesser goals that are currently competing for your time and attention, that you're still putting energy into? Your lesser goals, and again, everything we do is a goal, by the way. Even getting on Facebook is a goal. It's to see what's on Facebook. Every behavior you do is towards some end that you want. And so the only way to become an essentialist, the only way to actually become someone who you really want to be, is you've got to start eliminating the goals of your former self, the behaviors of your former self. You've got to remove the lesser goals, and sometimes that can be very scary. Just as one example, recently I had to eliminate a relationship that my former self, it was a dream project for myself, my former self. I had an opportunity to co-author a book with one of my heroes, but it got to the point where it was obvious it was a lesser goal. It was something that I wanted to do because my former self wanted it, but it was ultimately a distraction. It was a waste of time, and it was stopping my progress towards my true goal. And so you have to be radically honest with yourself. There are probably opportunities, maybe even great opportunities. Actually, one of the things that Jim Collins said in Good to Great is that once in a lifetime opportunities happen every day. You're going to have increasing opportunities come at you as you're making progress towards your goals and as you're building yourself up as a person, and almost all of those are lesser goals. And so you've got to really be honest with yourself. What are your lesser goals? What are the distractions that you're allowing into your life that you're still saying yes to, that you need to say no to? A really good litmus test is this. What does your future self say no to that you're still saying yes to? That's in terms of behaviors, attitudes, opportunities. What does your future self say no to that you're still saying yes to? Think about it. What are all the lesser goals in your life that you're still putting energy into, that if you would just start saying no to those things? That's actually how you build your commitment, by the way. Once you start saying no to lesser goals and fully committing to your future self, the one you really want, then you become able to overcome the obstacles between you and your true goal. You start to break past those barriers of mental, emotional, and also skill-based barriers. You can break through any barrier. That's called deliberate practice and also getting help from other people. But in order to fully commit to your goal and get really serious about it, you've got to remove those lesser goals. And here's just a final quote I'll give you. This comes from the book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. The statement from the book says this: commitment is a statement of what is. You can know what you're committed to by the results you're getting, not by what you say your commitments are. So commitment is purely based on the results you're getting. So if you weigh 300 pounds, then you're committed to being 300 pounds. Your commitment is not what you desire. Your commitment is what you have. And so whatever you have in your life in terms of income, results, situation is what you're currently committed to. And if you want to commit to something else, then you've got to let go of what you currently have. You've got to start saying no to those lesser goals. You've got to be honest about your future self. You've got to fully commit and publicly commit to your one major goal, and you've got to define it in simple terms. You've got to remove all those things that are pulling at your attention and just get laser focused. And I'll just say this. I have a lot of people, even people who are very successful, who I know, who are still just pulled in 20 different directions. And it's crazy how little flow they have. When you have less goals, you can have better goals. When you have less goals, you can be more present. When you have less goals, you can have clear priorities. You can have clear values. If you've got too many goals, then you're trying to prove something to yourself. You're trying to make up for some inadequacy. It's very powerful when someone has no more than 3 items on their to-do list on a daily basis, 3 items to do on a weekly basis. They're focused on outcomes. They're not focused on being busy. They're focused on outcomes. There's 2 economies, as Dan Sullivan would say. There's the results economy and there's the time and energy economy. When you get in the results economy, you've really clarified your 1 to 3 major goals. They're very specific. They're very clear. You know that those outcomes will really radically open up the results you're looking for. And then on a monthly basis, you're just focused on 3 targets to make progress towards those goals. On a weekly basis, you've got 3 targets and you're working towards those. On a daily basis, you've got no more than 3 targets. You're not busy. You don't have 10 things to do on your to-do list. You've got like 1 to 3, and you're actually making measurable, meaningful progress on what's important, not what's on urgent. And then you can have more flow. You're making more meaningful progress on a daily basis. You're in way more flow. You can let go and you can recover a lot better. You're not torn in a million different directions. You're not overly busy. You're not frantic. You're not frenetic. Instead, you're purposeful. You're intentional. You're clear on your future self. You're not competing with anyone else. You're just enjoying the process. And you're clear because you've got one goal. You can then create one path. If you got 50 goals, then you got 50 paths. And if you got 50 paths, then you're going in 50 different directions. And the truth of that is that you're pursuing too many lesser goals. The opposite of being extremely distracted is having an extreme sense of urgency towards your purpose and towards your goals and towards your future self. So I ask you, how much sense of urgency do you have right now towards your day and towards your future self? You can look at it like this. When you wake up first thing in the morning, are you having to drag yourself out of bed, or do you have a sense of urgency and purpose? Like you've got to get stuff done so that you can get where you need to go that day. Do you have urgency towards your future self? Do you even have clarity towards your future self? Do you know who you want to be, and do you know what you value? Here are the main reasons why people don't have a sense of urgency in their life. First off, they don't know what they value and they don't know what they believe in. If you don't know what you really value and what you stand for, then it doesn't really matter how you spend your time. There's a great quote from Meredith Willson. She said, if you pile up enough tomorrows, you'll find that you have a lot of empty yesterdays. So one of the reasons why people pile up a lot of tomorrows and they have a lot of procrastination and they don't have urgency is because they don't have something that they value and believe in. They don't have a sense of purpose and mission. They don't have high stakes. If the stakes are high, then you're going to have urgency because you realize you got to get stuff done, because if you don't get stuff done, it's just going to pile up, or there's going to be consequences. So part of having values and part of having a belief system is seeing consequences for your actions. If you don't take action, if you don't move forward, if you're not actually getting towards you want to go, there are consequences, not only for you, but for other people. I can speak from experience. I've got 6 kids, 3 of whom we've adopted from the foster system. I'm self-employed. It's up to me how much I work. I can work for 50 hours, I can work for 24 hours a day, or I can work for 0. Obviously there's consequences if I work for 0, but my wife's back home. And in our COVID world, she's homeschooling 6 kids. And so it's up to me how much urgency I have when I wake up and get my stuff done and get home to help her. If I don't have a huge sense of urgency, I'm going to spend a lot of time just distracted, watching videos, doing nothing with my time, and I'll get home a few hours late. That's not only going to impact my wife, but it's going to impact my kids over time. What's going to happen if I don't have urgency at work? There's a great quote that says, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if I don't have urgency and purpose and passion towards what I'm doing at work, when I go home, I'm probably not going to have urgency either. I'm probably going to waste a lot of time. I'm probably going to be distracted. I'm probably going to be staring at my phone. I'm probably not going to actually notice the consequences of my actions. And I'm also not going to feel that I have much control over my life. One of the reasons why people don't have a sense of urgency is because they don't feel like they can control the outcome. They don't feel like they actually have ability to influence themselves, other people, and outcomes. Instead, they may think they're either not clear on the outcome that they want, or they don't think that they have any control, so it really doesn't matter. Or that the consequences aren't that big if they don't have urgency. In other words, they don't see that it really matters that much if they're serious about it. However, there are huge consequences. There's huge consequences for you and for other people if you don't have a sense of urgency. There's a huge consequence if you don't achieve your goals. Here's what it looks like when you actually do have urgency. Let's just take for a second your goal, whatever it is. Let's just say your future self in 2 years from now is a millionaire. What if that was something that you got extremely urgent about rather than distracting and putting off till tomorrow? What if you got super serious about that goal and you removed all sorts of distractions and limitations? Whatever goal you have, or whoever your future self is, it could be that you are an author, an entrepreneur, it could be that you're married, whatever your future self is, whoever you really want to be, you first off need to clarify that, and you need to define why that matters to you. You have to have a value system and a belief system behind your goals, or else they're not going to be powerful. There's a great quote that says, when the why is strong enough, you'll figure out the how. And so the how is the system, the habits, the structure that you put, and the strategy towards getting your goal. But you're not going to actually develop a powerful strategy. As James Clear said, if you really care about the goal, you'll focus on the system, you'll focus on getting there. But you won't do that if you don't value the goal. So you have to first say, what do I value? Why does this matter? And then ultimately, you've got to ask yourself, what would happen if you got hell-bent on this? What would happen if you removed everything contradicting that future? That's basically my invitation for you, is clarify your future self and then become urgent about it. Get urgent about it, meaning you're going to remove all distractions, all contradictions towards your future self. Everything. They could be habits, anything that's stopping you from creating that future self, anything that's slowing you down remove it. Get urgent about your future self, urgent about who you want to become, urgent about what you want to do. And then you won't be distracted. This doesn't mean you can't have recovery. You need recovery. This doesn't mean you can't have hobbies, but it means that you have an orientation towards your future that is on offense, rather than that you have to willpower your way there. You're actually driven by purpose. So in psychology, there's two forms of motivation. There's push motivation, meaning you got to get pushed to do it, or you've got to push yourself to do it. It's not fun. It's not what you want to do. Or there's pull motivation, meaning you're being pulled by something that you strongly believe in, pulled by a cause, pulled by a belief, pulled by even a support group. Pull motivation is a lot more powerful and it's a lot more sustainable than push motivation. Willpower depletes pretty easily. And so if you have to push yourself to get out of bed, if you've got to push yourself to go to the gym or to exercise or to eat well, then it's not sustainable. You have to have some future self vision that you've got urgency towards, and you got to be on offense, not defense. You got to be actually moving towards that with aggressiveness. And I can tell you this, if you make that your only target, if you make that the only option, where whatever your future self is, whoever you want to be, you develop a sense of urgency and mission and purpose, and you begin removing things from your life that are clearly contradicting or stopping you from having that, all of a sudden you're going to have what Stephen Covey calls a personal bank account. Your personal bank account is essentially your character, but your bank account is how much you trust yourself. If you wake up and if you put first things first, if you wake up and if you do what is right, if you do what you believe in, you're going to believe in yourself more. You're going to have more confidence. You're going to have more self-trust. That's having a personal bank account. If you don't have a personal bank account, then you're not going to believe yourself. You're not going to care about yourself. You're not going to care about your future self either. And here's something else that's true. The more you care about your future self, the more your current self will be high quality. If you care about your future self's health, you're going to make better decisions in the present. If you care about your future self's finances, you're going to make better decisions in the present. The quality of your future determines the quality of your present. If you don't care about your future self, then you're going to make really bad decisions in the present. I have a lot of people in my family who are extreme drug addicts, as an example. Think about it. If you really don't care about your future self, then you're going to flush your future self down the toilet by making really bad decisions in the present. You're going to take hard drugs, or you're going to do things that are going to alter your mind, or you're going to ultimately just do things to waste your time. What you do now creates your future self. And if you're doing hard drugs, as an example, in the future, your future self may have no brain. They may be dead. And so what you do now not only impacts your future, impacts the future of others. And when you clarify your future self and you get urgent about that, then you can have it. And then now getting very specific. I'm going to talk about some of the research from Hal Hershfield, and then I'm going to go through like 6 or 7 specific things that you might not know about your future self. But one thing that's really important, so Hal Hershfield is a psychologist at UCLA. He's been studying future self concept for well over a decade now. One of the things that he's found is that most people, they're not very connected emotionally to their future self. Think about it. Human beings have probably evolved to make decisions that are a week or a month in advance. You might be able to make 1 week decisions or 1 month decisions. You might have a month's worth of money and be able to pay your rent or pay your bills. But how many people are making decisions that are, relevant to their future self 20, 30, 40 years down the road? Most people aren't very good at, for example, investing towards their retirement. Not only investing, but investing very well, like setting your future self up to be a millionaire, have tens of millions of dollars. You have a lot of time. If you've got 10, 20, 30 years to work with, you could set your future self up to be incredibly successful in terms of health, finances, in terms of relationships. But humans haven't really evolved or adapted to think that far into the future. And that becomes a big problem because human beings are living twice as long as they did 100 years ago. The life expectancy in America, about 150 years ago was 40. Now we're living to 80. It's projected that in the near future average life will be over 100. And so we live longer. We have a lot better health, nutrition, healthcare, and we have better cognitive abilities in our 60s, 70s, 80s, but people aren't prepping themselves for where their future self will be. And so here's kind of a key insight. The more emotional connection you have towards your future self and the longer out you think in your terms of your decisions, the better decisions you will make here and now. The less connected you are to your future self, the poorer will be your decisions in the present. And as a rule, most people are not connected to their future self. Most people view, your future self 15, 20 years from now doesn't really matter that much. There's actually a really hilarious episode of The Simpsons, the TV show The Simpsons. And, Homer Simpson's a drunk, and he's neglecting his kids as he does, and his wife, Marge, says, Homer, at some point, these kids are going to be out of the house, and you're going to regret, not spending time with your kids.
Someday, these kids will be out of the house, and you'll regret not spending more time with them.
That's a problem for future Homer. Man, I don't envy that guy.
That's how a lot of people live. They're like, that's a problem for future me to worry about. I don't envy that person. And a lot of people, here's what's really interesting. And this is just true. A lot of people think that, as they age, life begins to suck. And so a lot of people have a lot of negative emotions towards their future self. They think that life's going to be worse towards their future self. And so not only are they not emotionally connected to their future self, they're not making decisions that would benefit their future self, and they're actually making decisions that set their future self up for disaster. Research actually shows the more emotionally connected you are and committed you are to your future self, fundamentally the better decisions you make here and now. And that goes back to the idea that your view of your future shapes what you do here in the present. So that then begs the question, well, how do you get emotionally connected to your future self? Research shows that the empathy that you have towards other people is literally the same area of the brain that allows you to have empathy towards your future self. So here then takes me to step 1 of something you probably didn't but shouldn't know about your future self. And that is that your future self is a fundamentally different person than you. Your future self is completely different than you. Just put it this way. Think about who you were 10 years ago. Think about what world you were living in. Think about your daily actions, behaviors. Think about your goals. Think about how you define success. Think about what you were up to. You were not the same person 10 years ago as you are today, and your future self in 5, 10, even 1 year from now is going to be a different person than you. They're going to have different experiences than you have. They're going to have different goals. They're going to have different mental models. They're going to have different perspectives. Even me from 2 months ago, I've had some huge shifts in myself where I don't have some of the same goals. I've really learned a lot. I love the quote from Alain de Botton, and he said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. I'm not the same person I was 12 months ago. I'm in a big time different place, and I know a lot more than my former self knew. Just like you get updates in your iPhone, you want to get updates in your mental models. You want to get updates in your identity. Your identity is what you're most committed to. Your identity is the story you tell about yourself. Your identity is, again, what you're most committed to in terms of your beliefs, your values, and your definition of yourself. And your identity is the thing that drives your behavior. So first things first, recognize that your future self is a different person. They're in a different context. And then part of becoming empathetic towards your future self is recognizing that what you do now impacts your future self, just like what you do impacts the people around you. And then empathy kind of being like, well, what is my future self's context? What is their shoes? How do I actually get to know their context? What are they up to? What matters to my future self? The great part about future self versus someone else is that in a large part, you get to decide who your future self is. You get to decide who they are and what matters to them, what they value. But in a lot of ways, you don't get to decide that. In a lot of ways, that's just going to be a part of maturing, and a part of nature is, in 5, 10 years from now, your future self will fundamentally care about different things than you care about. And so you should probably start asking, what does my future self care about? What matters to them? Now, another way of getting emotionally connected to someone is better understanding their context. And research shows that it's actually easier to bring your future self to you than for you to try to go to your future self. And so one of the things you could do to get more emotionally connected to your future self is write a letter from your future self to your current self. Put yourself in the context of your future self. Could be 2 to 5 years into the future, whatever time frame you choose. And write a letter from the view of your future self. You get to write a letter from your future self to your current self and have your future self tell you what their life is like. Have your future self tell you what you care about or what they care about. And also have your future self give your current self some advice. That then puts you in the shoes of your future self. We're talking about being empathetic towards your future self, worrying about what matters to them. Another thing you could do to develop connection and an emotional connectiveness and commitment to your future self is to begin investing into your future self. You love what you invest yourself in. And by the way, whatever you invest yourself in grows. And everything you do is an investment towards something. Scanning social media, you're investing in social media, and whatever you invest in grows. And a lot of people invest in stuff that's literally trash. But whatever you invest yourself in grows, and so you might as well invest in your future self. Put your future self first. That is true of money, yeah, certainly. Pay your future self. Start investing in your future self in whatever forms you want, real estate, stock market, crypto, whatever, but start paying your future self first, but also start investing in other ways towards your future self, getting knowledge, education, investing in relationships, investing in the future selves of your kids. Some of the best investments you can make are small investments, small daily investments towards your future self. As an example, just recently, I was putting my 12-year-old daughter to bed, and I was tired. I just wanted to go to bed, but I just thought, I'm going to make a little investment in my daughter. And so I went and just cuddled with her, put her to bed, and that was a little investment in her future self and my future self, because part of my future self is having an amazing relationship with my daughter. And I want it to grow. And again, whatever you invest in, you become committed to. There's a lot of research behind that. One of them is called sunk cost bias, which is basically just whatever you invest in, you become committed to. One other is the endowment effect, that whatever you invest in, you feel ownership over. And whatever you have ownership over, you truly value and prize and you identify with. So make little investments and big investments towards your future self. Invest in learning. What does your future self know? Does your future self know Spanish? Maybe you don't know Spanish. Is your future self brilliant with money? Reading books, but also investing literally your money, your finances into your future self, growing your future self financially. There's a great quote actually from Jim Rohn, and he said that you should have the goal to become a millionaire, not for the $1 million, but for what it would make of you to become a millionaire. Your future self, if you're not already a millionaire, your future self should be a millionaire. And it's pretty easy to make your future self a millionaire. All you have to do is systemize it and automate it. Just have a certain amount of money leave your bank account and go into an investment account. And that will start to compound over time. And again, whatever you invest yourself in starts to grow. As your view of your future self grows, your current self becomes more motivated, has more hope, has more energy, has more excitement. Because whatever you invest in grows, that builds your confidence, because you can actually see that your investment grew. I remember when my financial advisor told me to start investing every week, just having an automated amount of money leave my account and go into my investment account. After a few months, I started looking at it, and the pile was growing. And obviously, whatever you invest in grows. And by seeing that growing pile, I had huge confidence. I'm like, holy cow. And confidence boosts motivation. If you don't have confidence and hope, you can't have motivation. But as you build confidence and start to see progress in your investments, whatever you're investing yourself in, your motivation skyrockets. And there's this idea in psychology that it's really demand that creates resources. And that demand is your motivation. How much demand do you have to getting a result towards your future self? And there's another quote that says, this comes from William Hutchinson Murray, that the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of events spring from the decision. Resources, people, mentors. As the saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Once you have a huge demand and motivation towards doing something, when you make a decision, the universe conspires to make it happen. You'll find the resources. You'll create the resources. And so whatever you invest in, you start to have more motivation towards, and you start to develop more capability and confidence towards, and you can grow that. So those are some ways you can invest towards your future self. So that's number one. And I'm going to go quicker through the other ones. But your future self is a different person. And if you want to have a development of a connection and a commitment towards your future self, you got to put yourself in their shoes. You got to care about them. You got to start investing in your future self. Number two is that your future self is fundamentally more capable than your current self. So in psychology, there's a concept called the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect is the idea that over generations, the majority of people become fundamentally more intelligent than the former generations. So if you were to measure the average person today on a typical IQ test, for example, the Wechsler IQ test is something that's scaled from, I believe it's 0 to 160. And anything between 90 and 110 is average, if you got the bell curve. 100 is the mean. So the average person in America's IQ is 100 on the Wechsler test. If you're below 70, you're mentally disabled. If you're above 130, you're a genius. But here's the thing. If you were to take the average person today, someone with 100 on that test, and drop them into America 100 years ago, that person who's average today would actually be a genius 100 years ago. A person who would get 100 on the Wechsler today would actually get a 130 plus 100 years ago. And vice versa, a person who was average 100 years ago, a person who would get 100 on the Wechsler 100 years ago, if you plopped them today, they would get a 70 on the test. That means people 100 years ago were, compared to the average of IQ today, people 100 years ago, the norm, those people were mentally handicapped. And that's because these tests are based on averages and norms. And what the average and the norm is today is enormously further along in IQ than where it was 100 years ago. The same is true in like 30, 40 years from now. Because the world is becoming so complex, because we're getting so much more education, we have better healthcare, because we're required to make enormously more decisions and have so many more inputs and deal with so much more complexity than former worlds. You know, we now live in a global exponential world versus the local linear world that people lived in 100 years ago. We're forced to learn, think, reason, make decisions at a fundamentally higher clip than people before. And so what the projection is that in 30 years from now, the average person in 30 years from now is going to be like an IQ genius today. So like people in 30 years from now who are getting hundreds on the test, if you were to plop those people here in today's context, they'd be IQ geniuses. They'd be over 130 on the Wechsler. Now, what does all this mean? What does the Flynn effect matter to you? Well, think about your former self. Think about where you were 10 years ago. If you were to take yourself 10 years ago and plop yourself into your current situation, into your current context, your former self would essentially be mentally handicapped. They would be fundamentally unequipped to handle what you're dealing with. Let me give myself as an example. So 10 years ago, and I'm filming this video right now in October of 2021, so if I were to grab the 2011 version of Benjamin Hardy and put them into my current life and say, 2011 Benjamin Hardy, go. Solve 2021 version of Benjamin Hardy's life. My former self would be screwed. They wouldn't have any concept of how to handle my life. They would also be dropped in a fundamentally different world. Think about how much different the world is than it was 10 years ago, but think about how much different my world is. In 2011, I had 0 kids. I wasn't even married. I've been married now for like 9 years. And so 2011 version of Benjamin Hardy would have to like figure out how to handle marriage on the spot. I also, again, had 0 kids. I now have 6, 3 of whom we adopted from the foster system. And one of them is already a teenager. Another one of them is almost a teenager. So 2011 version of Ben would have to now, on the spot, learn how to raise 6 kids, some of whom are in their teen years. 2011 version of Ben was making like $10,000 a year as an employee. Like 2021 Ben runs a small company, has multiple employees. This company is making multiple 7 figures. I'm now required to make decisions that are tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollar decisions. My former self was making $100 decisions. So my former self would not know how to make the type of money decisions that I currently is required to make. My former self wasn't writing books. They wouldn't be able to film this video, fundamentally. The only reason I bring all this up is to say your former self was fundamentally incapable compared to your current self, but the same is true of your future self. Your current self is far less capable than your future self. So that's number 2. Your future self is going to be enormously more capable than your current self. They're going to be more intelligent than your current self. And that's another reason why you want to have a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset think that their intelligence is fixed, whereas the truth of the matter is your intelligence is going to grow even if you're not trying to grow it. You're going to change. You're going to adapt to the changing environment, and you're also going to just mature. People mature over time in general. Some people mature a lot less than others, but if you're someone who's focused on your future self, if you're making better and better long-term decisions, if you're making investments towards your future self in terms of knowledge, education, better network, transformational experiences, and also if you're investing money in your future self, and if you're continually upgrading your knowledge and mindset compared to your former self, then you're going to be making fundamentally better decisions. I have a totally different mental model than even myself a year ago. And hopefully that mental model keeps improving versus my former self. Same is going to be true of my future self. My future self's mental model and context and quality of decisions and definition of success in a year and 2 and 5 years from now is going to be so much different and better and beyond my current self. Don't have a fixed mindset. Don't overly define your identity, your intelligence, your personality. Your future self's going to be different. Your future self is inevitable, but the outcome is optional. The outcome is your choice as you begin to think about your future self and create your future self. You first want to obviously connect with your future self, have empathy towards them, but then ultimately choose them, create them, and commit 100% to your future self. And you are whatever you commit yourself to. Again, your identity is what you're most committed to, and so you might as well commit to the future self you most value. All right, number 3. Your future self is actually more valuable than your current self. So what may be a handful of seeds in your current self's hands could be a full-on orchard to your future self. What may be $100 to your current self could be tens of thousands of dollars to your future self. Think about, just as one example, and it's obviously a very salient, potent example, of Bitcoin. 10 years ago, you could have bought a Bitcoin for like 10 cents. That same 10 cents now could be worth 60 grand. And so don't undervalue your current situation, because what's current for you is going to be massive for your future self. What's small right now is going to be big for your future self. And so your future self is more valuable. Your future self's time is more valuable. Your future self, their attention is more valuable. What's worth $10 to your current self could be worth $100 or $1,000 to your future self. And so the decisions you make right now have outweighed and compounding effects for your future self. So if you start investing now and learning and thinking about your future self is going to have enormously more value, 10x, 100x, a millionx the value of your current self in terms of time, attention, and maybe even resources, money. Your future self could be a millionaire or even a billionaire if you start thinking correctly about the value of your future self. Most people undervalue their future self. Most people, it's like the Pied Piper. It's that whole tale of the piper will be paid. Well, guess who the piper is? The piper is your future self. But most people, rather than making investments towards their future self every day, you got to pay the piper either way. The piper is your future self. If you pay the piper today, meaning you start investing in your future self today, your future self will get huge. But if you wait to pay the piper till tomorrow, meaning you put your future self in debt, meaning you make decisions now that are focused on the present but at the expense of your future self, then your future self's going to get smaller and worse. There's a great quote from Jim Rohn. He said that discipline weighs ounces, regret weighs tons. So if you pay the piper today, meaning you pay your future self today, meaning you make investments in your future self today, then your future self is going to compound enormously. Your future self is so valuable. And once you understand the value of your future self, you can make decisions today that weigh ounces, but then pay you back in tons. Or you could seek short-term gratification, which gives you an ounce of pleasure, but costs you tons in the future. It's up to you. Your future self's more valuable. The more you can realize that, the more you'll make investments daily in your future self that will compound and make your future self 10x, 100x, a millionx more valuable, more wealthy, more knowledgeable, more successful than your current self. Now, another big understanding to realize is that what's normal to your future self is not normal to you. It could be normal for your future self to have tens of millions of dollars, to be running a business, to be having 6 kids as I have. Like, what's normal to current Benjamin Hardy is not normal to former Benjamin Hardy. In fact, former Benjamin Hardy can't even comprehend what's normal to current Benjamin Hardy. The same is true for your future self. What's just normal life for them? Baseline, subconscious. Whatever is normal, automatic, habitual, subconscious, expected is your subconscious. And what's the subconscious expectation, normal life for your future self is beyond reality. It's not normal to your current self. And obviously, as you begin visualizing and thinking about who you want your future self to be, and as you begin making investments towards your future self, anytime you make an investment towards your future self, you're upgrading your subconscious. You're upgrading what you believe you deserve. There's a great quote from David Hawkins. He said, the subconscious will only allow you to have what you believe you deserve. And so as you begin making investments towards your future self, as you begin acting, behaving, and being, and then doing and having towards your future self, you'll begin to identify more fully with your future self. You'll be being your future self now and doing what your future self would do so that you could have what your future self would have. And so any investment you make towards your future self, even just small investments like maybe watching this video or, journaling for a few minutes or writing in your journal, reading a great book, maybe building a great relationship, or literally investing money towards your future self, those things become peak experiences that reset your sense on what's normal. And eventually, you start living it just in a enormously higher level in your future self. So what's normal towards your future self is not normal towards you. Here's another one. Your future self is an acquired taste. Your future self wants things that you might not want right now. Your future self might want brilliant health, whereas right now you're eating donuts. Your future self might want, I don't know what your future self wants. You got to think about that. But what they want might not be what you want. And here's what's great about desires is you can change your desires. Your desires are flexible. And so you can change what you want. And so it's best to actually start thinking about, what does my future self want? What does my ideal future self want? And then for you to start wanting that now, and for you to start investing in that now, and for you to start being your future self now. You can actually start making decisions right now that impress your friends in 10, 20 years, because you decided to want what your future self would want 10, 20 years in advance and started investing in that. And then you're essentially playing with house money, whereas most people are focused on their current desires. They're like, what I want right now is what I should focus on. Well, what if you started wanting what your future self wanted? What if you started having empathy and foresight towards your future self, and you started desiring what your future self wanted and start investing in that? And by the way, you love what you invest in. Whatever you start investing in, you start wanting more of. Those are a few things to think about towards your future self. One last one is that everything you do is either a cost or an investment towards your future self. Either you're costing your future self and making them smaller, or you're investing in your future self and you're making them bigger. If you invest in your future self and therefore make your future self bigger, then every time your future self gets bigger, your present gets better. There's a great quote from Dan Sullivan. He said, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. That goes back to prospection, the concept we gave in the beginning. As your future self gets bigger, your present gets better. You get more motivated. You get more committed. You are more engaged and more conscious of life versus just living on autopilot. You're living intentionally towards your future self. You're committing. You're being courageous. You're investing towards your future self. And your future self keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And also, you're measuring the gain, not the gap. This is a brand new book that just came out. Yes, your future self keeps getting bigger, but you're not measuring yourself against your future self. You're actually measuring yourself against your former self. You're seeing your gains. You're running your own race. There's a concept in economics that supply follows demand. If there's a huge demand for something, for example, iPhones or any form of product, if there's a big demand, then the supply will come. But if there is not a big demand, then there's no reason to build a supply. Well, that concept is also true in psychology. If there's an extreme demand upon you to do something, you will find the mental resources or the resources in general to find it. As the historian Will Durant said, the ability of the average person could be doubled if the situation demanded it. That concept is actually called the Pygmalion effect in psychology, that your abilities rise or fall to the demands of your situation. Your outcomes rise or fall to the demands of your situation. So if you come from a really demanding environment, if you come from a family that wants a lot of you, you're going to find that supply. If you're in a situation where you absolutely must get the result, or else things are going to fall apart. This is one of the reasons why deadlines are so powerful. Is because when a deadline's coming, all of a sudden there's this huge demand on you, and you have to create the result. You have to find that supply. You have to find that motivation. So the problem for most people is that there is not enough demand coming upon them from their situation. It's not necessary for them to achieve their goals. It's not necessary for them to achieve a certain outcome. For some people, the demand is required that they make over $1 million, or else things are going to fall apart. They have a business. They might have to make tens of millions of dollars. And so you have to ask yourself, what are the current demands that your environment places upon you or your situation, but also what are the demands that you set upon yourself? What are the demands of your future self? What if you demanded that your future self achieve a certain goal? There's a concept that you have to first be before you can do and do before you can have. So if you have a clear future self, if you have something you absolutely want, you have to demand it. You have to demand that you get what you want, and that's the level of faith required to achieve your goals. The question is, do you demand of yourself and of life that you get what you want? What would happen if you demanded it? What would happen if whatever your goal is, whoever your future self is, you demanded that become your reality? What would happen if the demand was so strong that you found the supply? There's a great quote that says that basically nothing happens until after you're committed. Once you get fully committed to something, then providence moves too. Then all sorts of things come to pass, such as material assistance, the right mentors, the right people. You know, as the quote says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is ready, they demand that the teacher appears. And so the question is, what would happen if you demanded that you achieve your results? Demanded it of yourself and demanded it of the world, demanded it of life, demanded it in your prayers, demanded it of your faith. What would happen if you became so committed to your result that you became willing to do whatever it takes? As the quote says, when the why is strong enough, you'll figure out how. Well, the first key to motivation is being 100% clear on what you want. And clarity of what you want all just comes down to making decisions. This is where most people get mixed up. This is where most people make things too complicated. Most people, they just say, I don't know what I want. Well, the ability to become a decision maker means you just have to select something. Select something that seems worthwhile, valuable. Rather than trying to find what you want, just say what is valuable, what is useful, what would be something worth having, and watch yourself then go through becoming the process of becoming the person. First, you have to decide, what does your future self possess? What do you want? What does your future self possess that you don't possess? It could be having your house paid off. It could be being an author. It could be whatever you want. It could be being in the most amazing relationship. It could be deeply being connected with God. It could be having the ability to travel. You have to actually clarify what your future self possesses that you don't. And then you have to be, do, and then have. You've got to then be your future self now. You've got to remove everything from your life that reflects what's current in your life in order to have or possess what your future self has. You have to actually embody the identity of your future self, because your behavior follows your identity, but your identity follows your goals. So in order to actually have a clear identity, you have to be very clear on what you want to possess. You have to be clear on what you value. If you're not clear on what you value and what you want to possess, then you're not clear on your identity. If you don't know what you want for your future, then you can't know who you are in the present. You could basically just be distracted and go a million different directions in the present until you get a clear direction. There's a lot of research on that in psychology. You can't know who you are in the present until you've defined who you want to be in the future. Until you've defined what you stand for, and until you've defined what you value and what you want to possess, you can't actually make conscious, clear decisions in the present. But once you've clarified specifically what you want, then ultimately you need to make that your identity. Then you have to demand that of yourself. And the way is easy. You start publicly telling people what you want. Most people, their identity or their story is based on the past. Their identity and their story is based on the past or the present. Most people are very definitive about who they are in the present. They say, I'm an introvert. I'm not very good with people. I make this much amount of money. What would happen if you made your story or your identity your chosen future self? What you demand of yourself and what you want to possess? If you made that your reality, meaning you made that your new story, once you start telling everyone about your true future self, once you make that the new narrative, your behavior always follows your identity. And your identity comes from your view of your future, and the problem for most people is that they're not demanding of themselves a very powerful future. You have to get very specific, and then you have to ultimately embody that identity. You have to own it. You have to own that that is your future, that that's what you're going to do, that there's no going back. And the moment you get 100% committed, which means you become highly public about it, you commit in your head, and ultimately you start committing in your behavior. You got to also start as an amateur. It's fine to start as an amateur. Sometimes it takes, often your behavior is what triggers your identity. In psychology, they call that self-signaling. And so if you have a goal, let's just say to own $5 million worth of real estate, well, maybe you need to actually get a few deals first. Get a few deals, watch yourself do it, and then realize, yes, I can do that. That's when you start building the confidence. Or in psychology, we call that identity capital. Once you see yourself do it a few times as an amateur, then you start to build the confidence and the desire that you can do this. As Napoleon Hill said, whatever the mind can conceive and believe the mind can achieve. Sometimes it takes working as an amateur to get to the point where you can actually believe it. Of course you can conceive it. I can conceive myself having a lot of money or some form of goal, whatever goal that is. But sometimes you've got to start as an amateur in order to get to the point where you actually believe it's possible. In order to actually see that there is a path to getting your goal. You need to have that path in order to achieve your goal. That's how you have motivation and hope. And so you got to start as an amateur, but eventually you've got to embody yourself as a pro. Eventually you've got to embody yourself fully as the person you want to be, and you've got to stop showing up as an amateur. Eventually you've got to stop showing up as a wannabe, and eventually you've got to just own that that is the reality you will have. As Eben Pagan said, he calls it inevitability thinking. Inevitability thinking is thinking and acting as if what you want is a foregone conclusion because you've set up the circumstances for it to happen. You've set up the environment, the conditions for it to happen. And so at some point, you've got to have this identity shift where it's the only reality that's going to happen. Rather than entertaining multiple futures or multiple realities, you set yourself fully and fixed on the one you absolutely want, and it becomes the only option. You cross your point of no return, you go highly public about it, and you start acting as that new person. Be, do, have. You just own that that is your identity. You own that that's who you are. You own that that's what you're going to do, and you own that those are the realities, and you own that that's the outcomes you're going to produce. And then you behave from the perspective of your future self. You behave through your new identity, and ultimately you'll have whatever you want. You can become whatever you want, but you have to fix in your mind what you want. And then ultimately you've got to make that your new identity so that your behavior flows through that. You have to own that that's who you are. And you have to ultimately start being that person in all ways. Remove all of the what Robert Brault would call lesser goals. We're kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals, is what Robert Brault said. So eventually you've got to just remove your lesser identity. Eventually you've got to remove the lesser behaviors, the addictions, the distractions of your former self. And eventually you've just got to fully embrace everything that's involved in being this new identity. Be, then do, then have. Demand it of yourself. Supply follows demand. If you demand that you achieve a certain result, the supply will follow. The supply is not only in your own motivation, but also, as Henry Hutchinson Murray said, mentors, financial assistance. What do you demand of yourself and what do you demand of your future? That's my question of you. A lot of people, they just don't demand that much of themselves. As the Pygmalion effect states, we are either rising or falling to the demands of not only our situation, but of our identity. And if your identity demands that you reach a certain financial situation, if your identity demands that you get to a certain place so that you can do something very important, when the why is strong enough, you'll find the how. If you don't demand much of yourself, you're not going to get much of yourself. You're going to have a weak identity. You're going to have a weak purpose. You're going to be weak in the present unless you demand a lot of yourself. If you're clear on your future and you demand a lot of yourself, then your present will be spent usefully. Your present will be spent consciously. Your present will be spent powerfully stretching towards a purpose. As Viktor Frankl said, what man needs is not a tensionless state. What man needs is the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. That's the great part about all this. You don't discover your future self. You don't find your future self. You have to choose it. It's a freely chosen task. You are an agent, a free agent. You get to choose ultimately what you do with yourself. You get to choose the future that you ultimately direct your future, you direct your present towards. You have to choose. If you don't choose, indecision is a decision. And so ultimately, it's not a tensionless state that you need. It's the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. That's how you live a good present. Without that, you're wasting your time. Without that, you're fading away. Without that, you're ultimately distracted and being steered by endless mazes of other people's agendas. So you have to fix your mind on what you want. You've got to make that your new identity. You've got to then fully own it at some point. You eventually get to the point where you own it by first starting as an amateur and then getting to the point where you conceive and believe it. And then at some point you just say, this is the only reality I'm going for. I'm going for it. I don't care what other people think. This is my new narrative. This is what I'm going for. I'm no longer embarrassed. I'm no longer ashamed of my future self. I'm no longer ashamed of my true goals and ambitions. This is who I am now, and I'm not hiding it from anyone. And then your behavior aligns with your future self. And then you quickly create the results you want. Then you start using your time effectively. Then you start using your days productively. How you spend 24-hour periods, your days, how you spend days really matters. How you spend 24-hour blocks of time determines how successful you'll become. And once you become committed to your future self, then you can start spending your days effectively. You can start building your environment and your life around being in flow and doing what Brian Tracy calls eating the frog. You can actually take action towards your first goals. You can start removing the lesser goals. You can start removing the lesser demands. You can start removing the wrong people. And ultimately, you can make your time and energy and thoughts focused. In psychology, the concept is simple. It's called selective attention. Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, has said, your eyes can only see and your ears can only hear what your brain is looking for. Well, you can't train your brain to look for something and to find what you're looking for if you haven't fixed in your mind what you wanted and then ultimately demanded that it happens. Once you fix in your mind what you want, and it's, by the way, your choice, as Frankl said, it is a freely chosen task. You get to choose the future you want. You get to choose the person you become. But you have to choose, and once you choose and then once you train your identity, then you train your worldview, because we all see the world in a subjective manner. We all see different things. We all create different meanings and interpret different things in different ways. But you get to train your worldview to find and to see what you're looking for. If you want to become a millionaire, you can train your worldview to ultimately get what you need and learn and surround yourself with the right people to become that. If you want to become a professional, anything. If you want to find God, you can train your worldview to do that. You ultimately train your subjective perspective, but you do that by choosing goals. You do that by choosing a goal, you do that by choosing a future, and ultimately by training your identity, and then ultimately training your thoughts, your desires, and your behavior to become who you want to be. And by the way, we all do this. What we desire consistently over time, we eventually become, as Neil A. Maxwell said. But most people, they don't consciously train their desires. Instead, their desires are implanted to them by the outside world. As Zig Ziglar said, your input shapes your outlook. Your input shapes your outlook. Your input shapes your thoughts, your desires, and your behavior. And most people, their inputs are through social media, through the news, through their friends. They haven't chosen their goal and then designed their environment and designed their inputs to create the worldview and the behavior and the desires they want. As Marshall Goldsmith said, if you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. Most people are automatons. Their desires, their worldview, their thoughts, their goals are being driven by social media and by other medias created by other people, by basically propaganda. The only way you can start controlling your environment, controlling your inputs to control your outlook, is when you define a clear future self. And then ultimately train your identity and train your selective attention or train your worldview so that that's what you see, that's what you find, and that's what you get. It's up to you. But if you demand it of yourself, you can create insane goals. You can achieve them very quickly. You can skyrocket past most people because most people are not clear and most people are being torn in a million different directions. If you study Olympians such as Michael Phelps and others, you find that they spend a lot of time visualizing their future self. They spend a lot of time at night specifically, but also before they practice and just throughout their day, visualizing themselves achieving their dreams, visualizing themselves on that podium winning gold, visualizing themselves doing the perfect performance. They spend a lot of time visualizing their future self, and there's a huge amount of research that shows that in order to actually engage in what psychologists call deliberate practice is how you develop skills and abilities and ultimately transform yourself into someone who's an expert at something. The only way to engage in that level of practice and training on a daily basis, where you become elite at what you do, is to have a clear version of your future self, a clear vision of your future self. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about the importance of visualizing, seeing, thinking about your future self.
Feeling connected to your future, feeling the inspiration, the joy, feeling the exuberance, the love for your future every day is going to, just like your body follows your mind to the coffee maker, to the toilet every morning, to the known, your body is going to follow your mind right into that future because that's where your attention and your energy is.
There's even a great book called As a Man Thinketh, and in that book, he talks about how your mind is like a garden and your thoughts are the seeds. Most people's mind, or their garden of their mind, is overrun with weeds. They're not in control of their garden, just like it's run wild. And so one of the first steps is obviously tilling the ground, completely clearing it, and then planting the right seeds so that those seeds bear fruit. And so what you think about and what you feel creates your future self. And my question for you is, how much time do you actually spend visualizing your future self? How much time do you spend seeing it, feeling it, creating it, being grateful for it? Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Do you know who your future self is? Do you actually see yourself being there? Do you spend time thinking about your future self in the negative, where you're expecting poor health in the future or poor financial situations? Are you creating negative outcomes by the thoughts you're planting? Or are you proactively planting the right seeds? Are you proactively planting and visualizing and seeing a beautiful vision of your future self? Visualizing your future self, especially at night before you go to bed, seeing that and then spending your days creating it and living into that, performing into your future self is crucial. If you're not spending time visualizing your future self and also writing down your goals, writing them down, writing down the achievements of them, if you're not spending your life chasing and creating your future self and living intentionally, then what are you doing? You're actually living your life by default. You're just going through the motions. You're not actually doing anything. You're not being creative. You're not taking action. You're not using your agency as a human being. So the first step is actually choosing who your future self is. It's okay to choose something, and even if you don't believe it's possible yet, it's okay to choose something even before you visualize it, but choose it. Even if you choose, being in a happy relationship or being an entrepreneur or getting to a certain level of income or whatever it is, connecting with God, whatever it is, choose something even before you believe it, and then write it down. Then spend time visualizing it and seeing it and spending more and more time seeing it. Even if you don't feel like it's honest, spend your time seeing it, spend your time writing about it, and then get to the point where you accept it. As you start taking action towards it, and as you just embrace that this is your future self, this is your identity, this is who you're going to be, you get to the point where you accept that this is just who you're becoming, this is who you are. And then as you take action towards your future self, you eventually integrate your future self. So you first start by choosing your future self, and you're the only person who can choose who you're going to be. But you have to choose who your future self is, or by default, your future self will just become someone. You don't want to set your future self up for disaster. So you might as well choose who your future self is. There's a great quote that says the best way to predict the future is to choose it, or to decide it and design it. And so choose your future self, or else someone else will. Only you can choose your future self. Then spend time seeing it, visualizing it, and then eventually you accept it. You just accept that this is your future self. This is who you're going to become. This is what's going to happen. You can stop doubting it. As you're taking action, your confidence will increase. your expectancy will increase, and eventually you just get to the point where you accept your future self. You expect that this is who you are, this is who you're becoming, and then you integrate your future self. Every step forward you're taking power moves, you're taking actions towards your future self. You slowly and over time integrate the habits, the environment, the friends, the media. One of the great things is your input shapes your outlook. And so as you're weeding out, and that's really what you're doing with the garden of your mind, you're weeding out your former self. You're weeding out your former habits. You're weeding out the things you used to say yes to, and you now say no to those things. You've weeded out things, and you're now planting better seeds. You're planting with more intention. You're planting better seeds. You're planting higher quality seeds, and you're planting a more fruitful garden of your life, and you're creating better and better outcomes. But you're the one who has to decide what that garden looks like, and you've got to be the one to plant those, and you've got to nourish those thoughts. And you train your thoughts by writing down your goals, by training your inputs, by telling people about your future self. There's a lot of research actually by Robert Cialdini. He talks about a principle called the principle of consistency. And as human beings, we have a desire to be consistent with our words. And so not only do you choose your future self, but you proclaim your future self. Bo Easton would say you declare your future self. You say, this is who I am, this is who I'm going to be, this is what I'm going to accomplish. This is where I'm going to go, this is who I'm going to become, this is the life I'm going to create. By stating those things and by declaring them and by affirming them, you start to have a sense and a desire to be consistent with those. And as you take action towards those, often courageous actions, power moves towards your future self. You start to integrate. You start to build an environment around your future self. Marshall Goldsmith said, if you do not create and control your environment will create and control you. Integration means you're actually taking the actions you make. You're taking big leaps. And then you integrate it rather than reverting back. Reverting back would be having what Gay Hendricks would call an upper limit problem. He talks about that in the book, The Big Leap, where you make a step forward, but then because you're starting to feel good and you're starting to feel successful, you revert back to your comfort zone, which is feeling guilty or unworthy or whatever deep psychological issues hold us all back from success. And so you want to continuously integrate. As you learn something or as you improve, you set that as a new foundation for your current self, and then you keep improving. You have better friends around you, have better habits, you have a better environment, you've got better expectations, better measurements of success. You continuously integrate what you're learning along the way so that it just becomes a system and an aspect of yourself. And then you release your former self. You give yourself permission to just release your former self. Permission to not be who you used to be. Permission to forgive your former self. Permission to no longer be defined by your former self. In his book, Think Again, Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, he talks about the importance of not attaching your current self to your former identity. A lot of times your former self made decisions or made commitments or took actions that no longer resonate with your current self. You can release your former self. You don't have to have any negative energy. In fact, you shouldn't have negative energy towards your former self. But as you're accepting your future self, as you're taking action towards your future self, as you're integrating your future self, you want to just release your former self. Let go of your former self. No longer be who you used to be. No longer say yes to what you used to say yes to. No longer believe what you used to believe. You actually are just continuously improving how you see the world, how you act, the clarity of your vision, the clarity of your action, the clarity of your word, the clarity of your integrity, the clarity of your morality. You're continuously improving your future self, and you're releasing your former self. And you're not the same person you were before, and you don't need to see the world the same way you did before. And you don't need to take the same actions you did before. You just release your former self every step of the way. So my invitation to you is visualize your future self, see your future self, feel your future self, be grateful to your future self. One of the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza said, and there's a lot of research on this, even in the realm of epigenetics, your brain doesn't know the difference between a visualization and an actual experience.
The act of closing your eyes, as an athlete, you know this, and you begin to rehearse in your mind, mentally rehearse what you're about to do, begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like you've already done it. Now the brain is no longer a record of the past. It's now a map to the future. And if you keep hitting that hardware over and over again, the hardware is going to become a software program. And who knows? You just may start acting like a happy person. There's no magic there.
And so if you visualize and if you feel grateful for an experience, your brain will begin to wire that as your reality. And then you'll start to actually create, manifest that reality. And so spend time visualizing, seeing, feeling, and being grateful for your future self, feeling those experiences, seeing them, rehearsing them, just like you would, just like a performer would rehearse an experience, just like an Olympian would rehearse an experience. And then you watch yourself perform and actually get better and better at actually creating the experiences in real life as you had in your visualizations. And then you can create that. You can create the outcomes you want. I can tell you this works. I recently wrote a book, and I spent some time visualizing what I want that book to look and feel like. And it's totally that. It's exactly what I wanted. And you are a creator. And the more time you spend visualizing and creating specifics, and then watching yourself create specifics, not generalities, creating specifics. What's a specific experience you want to have, or a specific result you want to create, or in a specific environment you want to create? The more you visualize specifics and then create those specifics, the more confidence you have. And then confidence creates the realm for more imagination. Albert Einstein actually said that imagination is more important than knowledge, but imagination is largely based on your level of confidence. And so as you even create small wins and celebrate those wins, then your imagination increases, and then with that increased imagination comes increased action and increased courage. And as you take more courageous actions, your confidence will continue to increase. So create with your imagination, create specifics with your mind, feel it, and spend time visualizing yourself. Spend time visualizing your future self. It's such a beautiful, important thing. Obviously, it's not enough. It's not enough to just think about it. You got to actually take bold action. One of the things I love about the book, The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone, is he says, not only do you want to have 10X vision, but you need to take 10X action. You need to take 10X the type of action and the quality and the consistency of action than you think you should. So it's not just about seeing. You do have to take 10X action. You actually have to engage in the behaviors of your future self. You got to actually apply courage. You got to take action. You got to be bold. You miss every shot you don't take. But those shots, you're not worried about making or missing every shot. You're just worried about taking action, and your actions begin to reflect your future self. Your environment begins to reflect your future self. Your situation begins to reflect your future self. Your income begins to reflect your future self. So who is your future self? That's my question. Who is your future self? Do you see that person? Are you clear on it? What are the specifics of that future self that you're now going to go create? I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I hope you liked this video. Please give it a thumbs up. Cheers to your future self. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Please help other people learn the science of their future self. Have an amazing day.